There are several names when it comes to the sport of boxing that have stood the test of time and will probably be remembered forever. Mike Tyson, Sonny Liston, Bob Fitzsimmons, and of course Muhammad Ali, among many others. But today we will cover the life of a Norfolk-born man who was a true trailblazer in the sport and a pioneer of many of the aspects which are now commonplace, and would go on to be the first ever heavyweight champion of the world. James Jem Mace was born on the 8th of April 1831 in the village of Beeston in Norfolk. He was the fifth of 8 children born to William and Anne Mace, who ran the local blacksmith shop. There are extensive gaps in our knowledge of his first couple of decades. It's believed he grew up working on a farm and also spent time as a cabinet maker. What we do know is his first passion was about as far from boxing as you can get. He was a keen amateur violinist. His life would change when he was 18. He had been performing for the crowd with his violin when he was attacked by 3 drunken fishermen in the coastal town of Great Yarmouth. His instrument was destroyed, and to the shock of the fishermen, James discovered he could fight. He quickly drove the 3 men off, and then, turning round, realised the crowd that had been watching him play had now been watching him fight. A gentleman walked up to him, handed him a sovereign, and told him, "You ought to be a prize fighter." James had learnt his true calling and was now heading down the road to boxing. For his time, he was fairly tall, 5'9", but was not very solidly built for a boxer, something he would make up for with a powerful left jab. By the 1850s, his boxing career was just starting out. He worked as an exhibition fighter at the former English middleweight champion Nat Langham's Rum Pum Pass Boxing Club, near what is today London's Charing Cross Road. Among his opponents in his early career was Archibald William Douglas, 8th Marquess of Queensberry. His father had developed the famous Queensberry rules that are still in use today. James would take a keen interest in these rules and spent much of his professional life promoting them around the world. Nat Langham clearly took a liking to young James and saw a great deal of potential in him. He soon took him under his wing. The pair toured the country, with James taking part in small matches, mostly against amateur opponents at county fairs. While at these fairs, he also entertained the waiting crowds with his skills on the violin. Before we go much further in his story, we must remember that although the core of the sport was the same, much of what we think of boxing today had yet to be developed. The matches were fought bare knuckle and often outdoors on grass that could be rock hard in summer, frozen in winter, and a quagmire of mud in the rain. His skills in these makeshift rings would soon make Jem a rising star. Among these early matches that helped make his name was against an opponent called Bob Slack, held on the 2nd of October 1855 in Mildenhall, northwest of Cambridge. A match that would see 24-year-old Jem come out on top, going 9 rounds in just 14 minutes. But his matches were still very small, only attracting a few gatherers. It wouldn't be until 1857 that a fight of his drew a real crowd. He fought against another novice, Bill Thorpe, on Canvey Island for the prize of £50. Both men were similar height and weight, so it seemed like a promising setup. It lasted 18 rounds over the course of 23 minutes, before Thorpe's handler threw in the sponge, ending the match as it was clear he couldn't go on. It would be foolish, though, to think that Jem was always untouchable. When he came face to face with Bob Brettle, fighting on the banks of the River Medway on the 21st of September 1858, he conceded the fight after only 3 minutes. With such a quick loss hanging over him, Mace must have been nervous when his next big fight came around only a few months later, in the January of 1859, against an undefeated opponent, Posh Prince, on Aldershot Common. It was described as a tough match. The 2 men gave their all for 11 rounds, until Mace landed one of his powerful punches into Prince's left arm, breaking it and ending the match. Mace had won once more. As the 1860s came round, James was now working as a trainer in Nat Langham's gym, where he pioneered many training techniques that are today standard, including using a skipping rope for agility training and the importance of footwork and movement compared to the way many boxers fought at the time, rooted in the spot trading punches with each other until one could no longer carry on. An innovation that for a time left Mace branded a coward and a charlatan for avoiding punches and not fighting properly. It would be through Nat he would be introduced to a man he would soon call a friend, but would also be one of the hardest fights of his early career, the black boxer Bob Travers. The two soon sparked up a friendly rivalry, competing in everything, even taking part in foot races against each other. But of course, it was only a matter of time till they had to prove who was really the best in the ring. In early 1860, they arranged to face each other in the North Kent marshes, with £50 and a large amount of bragging rights in the gym on the line. The fight began, but after only 6 rounds, the police arrived and broke them up, moving them and the crowd on. They packed up and moved back towards the capital, before starting their match again in an area of what is today southeast London. This time it would be the fight both men were looking for. Travers tried to lead, but Mace was a more skilled defender and could hit harder than his friend, and it was clear by round 34 that he would most likely come out on top. Despite this, the match would go on for 23 more rounds, before ending due to a foul, when Travers threw himself to the floor to avoid one of Mace's punches. James was once again victorious, after 57 rounds and 1 hour and 31 minutes of fighting. Given the deeply ingrained attitudes at the time towards race and different nationalities, these two striking up a friendship may sound odd, but James would prove time and time again throughout his life that race, ethnicity or nationality did not matter to him. As long as you were into boxing or you were friendly to him, he would be friendly with you and he would compete against anyone. The following year, Jem Mace took the final steps away from being an amateur when he took on the heavyweight champion of England, Sam Hurst, on the 18th of June 1861. Hurst was a formidable opponent, 3 inches taller than Mace and about £50 heavier, but a broken leg from the year before had badly affected his speed and his form, something that James was more than happy to take advantage of. Mace took control of the fight early, and by the 8th round was fully in control. Hurst was all but beaten, and James stepped back to give him a chance, as he now seemed incapable of even defending himself against the blows landing on him. Hurst may have been far from the peak of fitness due to injury, but he clearly wasn't lacking the will to fight. He charged at Mace, forcing him to land another blow on him. Moments later, the sponge was thrown in by Hurst's second, ending the match. Mace gained the title Heavyweight Champion of England, and Hurst retired shortly afterwards. Although the prize money gained in these fights was nothing to turn your nose up at, there were often large spaces of time between matches where he had to make his own money. Jem chose to do this by joining travelling circuses and performing in exhibition matches before the crowd. By coincidence, this brought him into contact with another man we will be covering on this channel in the future. In the summer and autumn of 1861, he toured around Lancashire with Pablo Fanke's Circus Royal. Pablo Fanke, whose real name was William Darby, was born in Norwich in 1810 and holds the distinction of being the first black circus owner in Britain. For Jem, winning the title was one thing, and showing off his skills under the big top meant easy money. But now he would have to defend his claim. The first that came for his title was Thomas King, a man 4 years his junior, 4 inches taller and £20 heavier. They fought on the 22nd of January 1862, recorded as a cold and rainy day in Godstone. As well as the title, £400 was on the line. The pair were pretty equal with each other for the first 30 rounds. Mace was fighting almost blind due to black eyes given to him by King, but not without delivering several brutal punches to his opponent's throat, who was now struggling to breathe. The fight would carry on for 13 more punishing rounds, until King was downed by 2 uppercuts and was unable to get back to his feet. Although James won the fight, the pair met again just 10 months later, and the rematch would not go his way. Despite leading the fight for the first 30 rounds, he lost his footing at the wrong moment and took a punch from King right under the eye on the left side of his nose, almost knocking him out cold. Mace struggled on for another round before conceding the fight and forfeiting the title. Probably wanting to forget his defeat, or maybe his time with Pablo had rubbed off on him, Jem started his own circus, spending the final months of 1862 touring the country, visiting Canterbury, Brighton, Ipswich and Norwich, among others, even sparring in some exhibition matches with Tom King again. But their relationship soon soured, ending with them brawling in the street when King refused to fight for the title again. Although in the long run it mattered little, King soon retired from the sport and the title defaulted back to Mace anyway. In February 1863, James was presented with the Windham Gold Cup, a boxing trophy in recognition for holding the English heavyweight title. The trophy also contained 10 ounces of gold, worth £80,000 today. In the September of that year, he took a shot at claiming another title, this time the English middleweight champion. The match originally started on the 1st at Wootton. Just an aside here, I've taken a look round. There are several places in England with Wootton in the name. I have been unable to find out which one it was. And the location of this match is largely irrelevant, as it was stopped after only 13 minutes when the police came. They were finally able to rearrange it, and it took place again in Purfleet in Essex. When it did take place, it lasted for 2 hours and 10 minutes, ending when Mace connected a powerful hit to the left side of his opponent, Joe Cross's jaw, in round 18. The two men would meet again some 3 years later, this time fighting for the title of heavyweight champion, that in the subsequent years Mace had lost and was now attempting to win back. By all accounts, it was a close-run fight. Cross was a younger man, but equal in height and weight to Mace, but lacked the experience and raw skill that Jem brought to the ring, easily avoiding and countering many of the blows laid on him. And by round 21, it was all over. Mace was largely unhurt, while Cross was beaten around the head, face, neck and chest. Despite this, he was not willing to give up. Even after the sponge had been thrown in, he made a determined but weak punch at Jem, who simply stepped aside and avoided it. The title was his once again. 1867 brought news that would change the course of James's life. Bare-knuckle boxing, also known as prize fighting, was banned by the British government. Not that this stopped them, of course. As with all things, being made illegal simply sent it underground, with people travelling huge distances to be able to attend, such as one of Jem's fights held in Ireland, where spectators were told to gather in a pub in Dublin, only once there to be told the fight was being held the next day over 100 miles away in Tipperary. The game of cat and mouse they were playing with the law must have added an extra level of thrill, but the rules were perfectly clear. Anyone who participated in either training, competing, or helping in the fights was facing arrest and prosecution. As James found out when he was arrested and was officially cautioned by a court that he must not fight again. Not a man who liked to be told what to do, Mace decided if he could no longer do what he loved in his home country, he would simply go where he could. In 1869, he packed his bags and made the long journey across the Atlantic to America, where, in a country still finding its feet after a bitter civil war, bare-knuckle boxing was flourishing and the prize money was good. To get his name out there in this new land, he spent a period of time travelling with the American boxer John Heenan, performing in exhibition fights. During his time in New York City doing these fights, Jem also took a small role as a wrestler in a production of As You Like It by William Shakespeare. And although having very few lines, several members of the audience commented how well he played the role. The most important fight of his career came on the 10th of May 1870 in Kenner, Louisiana. In a 45-minute bout, he took on and beat Tom Allen, born in England but moved to America in his late 20s, and the current holder of the American heavyweight title. His victory here is considered by some in the boxing world to make Jem the first heavyweight champion of the world. An incredible achievement given his advancing age for the sport. He was 39 during the time of this fight, taking on an opponent 10 years his junior. and Tom Allen was a determined opponent to say the least. He only conceded the fight after 10 rounds because he had broken his shoulder after taking a bad fall. He spent 1871 around New Orleans in Mississippi, losing an exhibition match against gentleman Jose Alonso on the 6th of April, and fighting to defend his title in November, when he had a particularly brutal match against the Irish-American Joe Coburn on the 30th. A fight that was called as a draw in the 12th round, due to both men being too injured to carry on, and also due to a heavy rainstorm that had hit the area, leaving both men now fighting up to their knees in mud. James was forced to leave Mississippi and the United States shortly afterwards, following an attempt on his life by a group of Irish gangsters under the protection of corrupt New York Governor John Morrissey. Angered by the draw with Coburn they had lost a good deal of money on, as well as simply looking to take out their anger against the English on James. He returned to America in 1876 and took part in a gloved match against Bill Davis in the National Guard Hall at Virginia City, Nevada, a fight that he soundly won, and now very aware of his Englishness since his run-in with the gangsters, did all he could to build personal relationships with Irish fighters and fans, winning begrudging respect, if nothing else, that over the years would grow to see him generally well respected and welcomed by the Irish community. He spent much of his later career travelling the world doing exhibition matches. Over the course of 1878 and 1879, he took part in as many as 30 of these matches around Australia with John Thompson. These fights were done with boxing gloves and following the Queensberry rules, and have been credited in making both of these now standard ways of competing in the sport much more popular to the general public around the world. While in Australia, James had another potentially deadly run-in where his people skills and personality had to do all they could to make up for Anglo-Irish relations at the time. He and another English boxer had just finished an exhibition fight in a small outback town, and, as you would expect, were both exhausted from the fight and from the heat. As the crowd departed and they prepared to go inside and cool down, 4 heavily armed men with Irish accents rode up to them and demanded they fight again for them as they'd missed the first one. Mace explained who he was and what they were doing, and slowly began to turn the situation around when he discovered the men were fans of Larry Foley, an Irish-Australian boxer who was a protege and a good friend of James. After a few more now light-hearted words, the men left without incident. Only after did Mace learn these 4 men were from the Kelly gang, led by the infamous bushranger Ned Kelly, a keen boxer himself in his youth and no lover of the English. Had James not been such a confident and approachable man, things may have ended very differently that day. Much of his later years was also taken up with training many up-and-coming young boxers of the time, including Robert James Bob Fitzsimmons, who would go on to win the World Heavyweight Championship himself, the Caribbean-born Peter Jackson, who due to his race was unable to compete for the regular World Heavyweight title, but would go on to hold the World Coloured Heavyweight Championship from 1888 to 1896, and Albert Griffith, who fought under the name Young Griffo, would hold the World Featherweight Boxing Championship from 1890 to 1892. Not only working as a trainer, he turned his hand to being a boxing manager as well. Working with the New Zealander Herbert Slade, he toured his home country and over to New York for the first couple of months of 1883, before being forced to return to England after receiving the tragic news that one of his sons, Edward, had drowned in the River Thames. The tour resumed in England in April of that year. And this is how he would spend the next few years, touring, managing, and doing the occasional exhibition fight, and of course training young boxers, including opening up a boxing academy in Cape Town, South Africa. Incredibly, Mace was still climbing into the ring in his late 50s, but things were not always going his way. On the 7th of February 1890, he fought for the current vacant English heavyweight championship against Charlie Mitchell. By now, Jem was 59. His opponent was decades younger, so it should come as no shock that Jem was beaten in just 4 rounds. Even this didn't end his time in the ring, and he was still taking part in non-title matches as late as 1904 and beyond. Away from the ring, and much like many boxers today, James had his hand in many businesses and activities. He owned and ran several pubs wherever he went, some with a much more rough reputation than others. Among his portfolio was the Capitol Saloon in New York City, found on 23rd Street in Manhattan. Known for its gambling, it soon attracted much of the city's criminal element. Most famously, the Irish-American gang, the Dead Rabbits, and their fiercely anti-Irish rivals, the Bowery Boys, who, although by Jem's time had greatly decreased in their numbers and severity, were still not people to be crossed, as James Wild Jimmy Haggerty found out when he was shot in the saloon and later died on the 25th of January 1871. A location with a far less violent reputation can be found much closer to home. The now gone Swan Inn on Swan Lane in the city of Norwich. In 1902, he took part in a coronation tournament at London's Royal Albert Hall to celebrate the crowning of King Edward VII. After this, he mostly hung up his gloves and settled in Birmingham and ran the Black Lion Hotel on Cohill Street for a while. Jem had lived a life of plenty, to say the least. It is said that he fathered at least 14 children, committing adultery and bigamy several times during this process, including an affair with the actress Ada Isaacs Menken. Between his fights and other ventures, it's estimated that James had a net worth that would be around 20 million in today's money. And hearing that, you may expect that he lived out the rest of his life in luxury. But this was not to be. Jem had always been a prolific gambler, and an unlucky one at that. But after the death of his last wife, things really began to spiral out of control. With no one around to reel him in, he lost his fortune, and would spend the final 5 years of his life living off the standard old age pension of 5 shillings a week. He wrote his autobiography, 50 Years a Fighter, in 1908, but once again gambled away all the profits it made. He largely fell back onto his old passion of music, although he did enter the ring one final time for an exhibition match at the staggering age of 78. But he would finish his life as a near penniless street musician on the streets of Jarrow in Durham, where he passed away aged 79 on the 30th of November 1910 of natural causes. He was laid to rest in an unmarked grave next to his daughter's family plot in Anfield Cemetery in Liverpool, with only one of his children and a reverend in attendance. His grave would lay unmarked until 2002, when the Merseyside and Wirral Former Boxers Association arranged to have a black marble headstone laid on his grave that reads, "When hardy heroes nature's weapons wield, he stood unconquered, champion of the field. Time counts him out, but memory will remain. We ne'er will look upon his like again." James Mace would be inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame in 1954 and the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1990 as one of the pioneers of boxing, and is considered by many to be the father of the modern interpretation of the sport. His final induction would be into the Australian Hall of Fame in 2014. In Norwich, he is remembered by a blue plaque on the wall of what was the Swan Inn, and a memorial stands to him in Beeston Churchyard, the village of his birth, next to the grave of his parents. During a visit to the UK, Mike Tyson was interviewed, and when asked if there was anyone from British history he would like to have met, he answered without hesitation that it would have to be James Mace. He has the distinction of having won, if not the longest boxing career in history, and he played not an insignificant role, taking it from the sport of brawlers and cutthroats to the worldwide acclaim it has today. During his life, James Mace also picked up the name Gypsy, or the Swaffham Gypsy, a rather strange addition. He had no connections to the Romany people, although his uncle had married into the community, and James himself counted many of them as his friends, often living among them towards the end of his life. But the name was possibly done to win favour and fans among the large number of Irish immigrants and their descendants in America, who were unlikely to cheer for an Englishman in the best of times, and as James found out, was a good community to win on your side. So next time you see a boxing match advertised, just think what the sport might have been like if it had not been for the early pioneers like Jem. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. All of the information and pictures used can be found in the description below. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you wish. This was Jem Mace, the father of modern boxing, and this was a little bit of history.